The president, Mr. John Pudner, he's the president of the Faith and Freedom Foundation. And John is no stranger to Eau Claire. He's been here and spoken before in this very room. So, John, come on up, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I was noting this is actually my fourth speech in Eau Claire over my last 4 years. Scott invited me 4 years ago, and that is the highest in the state. So I've been to 49 of the counties, but always good to be here. And I want to start with a quote for you today, because I really wanted to speak right after this last election. And that is, the most important day is the day after the election. And those of you who are here, you understand these are marathons. That quote is from someone on the other side. It's from one of the best liberal turnout people in the state who runs Souls to the Polls in Milwaukee. The left doesn't take a break after elections. The reason they come back stronger in April is they start campaigning for April the day after the presidential election, win or lose. And the fact that you're here today is a credit, to have so many of you here the day after, because too often conservatives get content, either depressed from a loss or overjoyed from a win, which is what we were fighting this year at the polls, and trying to convince people there's an election in 3 weeks. I had conservatives ask me 2 weeks before this last election, have you been bored to death since the presidential with nothing going on? No clue there was a Supreme Court race 2 weeks away. And that's what we fought at the doors. And so that's the battle we have. And so I'm going to pivot here. I've been here a few times. I promise no political war stories this time. That's the problem with an old guy like me who's done them for years. I want to focus on the policies that we're focused on that I think are so key, because it's a policy battle now for the next year, and then that goes into who's elected. But so I passed out of flyers. You don't have to take notes if you don't want to. I'm a note taker, so if you are, that's fine. But just so you do have an easy reference for the issues I want to cover. But the one thing I do want to say about the election, because I think Scott covered it very well. His analysis was right on and everything. I wouldn't disagree with anything there. I did want to focus on one thing he noted. He noted that the WOW counties and one other and Ashland were the only, were the 5 top turnout, most turnout, retained the vote. We door-to-door to all of Ashland. We kind of did that as an experiment. We didn't have the manpower to hit every rural county, but to Scott's point, we got a call saying, hey, it doesn't look like any conservative groups are really hitting the 7th district. Can you get people there? And so we hit every door we could get to in Ashland. Now, some were too rural, some you couldn't get to, but even if it was short drives between stops, we joke that's car-to-car doors, but we did it. And look, it's the one that matched WOW for top turnout. And so that was like a pilot project, not to say, getting an extra 1,000 vote, and the county flipped. The county flipped to Republican. So we know the model works. To your point, we have proof that the model works. We did a pilot. I wish we had enough money for 200 canvassers so we could have done a bunch of pilots. That would have made a difference. But we know the model works. So again, Scott was right on with that analysis. So that's the one wrap-up I'll say on the election. I'm going to go through 8 issues here, and I'm happy to take questions on any of them. These are the 8 we're focused on: Wisconsin, faith, and freedom, that we think are top priority, but we want input. We've gotten these partly from going around the state and talking, and if you say 2 of these that you think these should be our absolute focus, feel free to circle them, send them back. They're on our website too. Say, hey, I strongly support this one, needs to be a priority. And if there's something you think is, that's not really a big issue out here, feel free to put not important or whatever. We want to keep getting feedback and keep evolving the list, but these are the 8 I want to touch on. So the first one is a 10-year fight that I think we're finally on the verge of potentially winning, and that is stopping what Act Blue does to move billions of dollars to liberal causes and candidates. They do this through a very illicit practice. Imagine if you were selling something and you said, I want a credit card contribution, then I'm going to mail you a stereo or deliver a car or whatever. But the one thing is, I do not want your CVV number on the credit card. I'm just going to take the payment. I'm not going to verify your address. I'm not going to see whether or not you live there. If that's a real person who lives at your address, matches your credit card. There's only one group in the country that does that. It's Act Blue. They do it to move contributions. And why do they do it? Because whether or not it's really some liberal a block down the street, or a programmer in China, that money can be moved if there's no verification. And don't think credit cards, think gift cards for a minute. You can buy thousands of gift cards at a time. Why would you do thousands? Well, because when ActBlue first started this, they made a mistake. They had $160,000 in small contributions going through a teacher, a retired school teacher. Now, the teacher had nothing to do with it. This wasn't a bad school teacher. She was retired. But when the research was done, Peter Schweitzer, a friend of mine, used to chair C4 Peter and I pulled a program where we said, if we wanted to move $10 million today, here's an ActBlue site, how would we do it? The programmer came back the next morning and said, I wrote a program last night that would do it. Not just theoretically you can do it. It takes a programmer less than 24 hours to write a program. He said, if you really were trying to move $10 million, obviously we weren't, I could assign it to names, $10 at a time, $50 at a time, random names, phone booking, send them out, and then how do you investigate? Well, ActBlue their first year made a mistake because they ran $160,000 using the same name, not realizing that cumulatively that would show up in a finance report. And suddenly President Obama, then candidate Obama, had $160,000 from one person, which breaks campaign law, obviously. So, oops, okay, we got to have this money go through 1 million people, not through one. So that's the ActBlue process. Thankfully, we really have a champion now in Congress, and that's Brian Stile from the Southeast. He has launched an investigation. He is putting together legislation to outlaw this practice. And this investigation is going well. The reason I know it's going well, 7 of the senior members of ActBlue have resigned since this investigation started a few months ago. Now, they're still bringing in $1 billion a year. Someone told me, don't worry about them, they're out of business now. No, they're not out of business yet. But this is what we need to do. And so we're talking to some state legislators about sponsoring state legislation, which we have done. Texas passed something to curtail it. New Mexico actually did. And so we have a chance here. We at one point had a bill with 83 sponsors. Almost a decade ago, we almost stopped this before the Democrats took over Congress and killed the effort. So that's issue number 1. And these first 2 I'm going to spend a little more time on than the other 6. I'll go through them quickly. But the second is restricting late-term abortions. Now, this is the one issue where I'm going to talk a little about some of that internal divisiveness that we've got to get over to win on this issue. So I first stood outside a Planned Parenthood to protest it when I was 9 years old, okay? I mean, I was the oldest of 9 children, not yet. My mom didn't have 9 yet when I was 8 years old, but we went there. I mean, this has been the fight of a lifetime for me. It's what got me into politics. We've had a terrible shift politically in the last 3 years. 3 years ago, half of the people in Wisconsin, America thought most abortions should be stopped. Right. Not all, but most. Half thought most should not be. Maybe a few, but not. So it was half and half. This is the one issue we've lost ground on. Right now, today, I can tell you from real research, not from public polls and all, a third now want most abortions stopped. A third want no abortion stopped. This is just political reality. And the middle third wants most legal. So we have to fight for minds and hearts too. So to do this, we started something, got a little controversial within the pro-life community, but last year we said, let's get a constitutional amendment on to at least reframe this issue. Let's say, do you realize that right now in Wisconsin, abortion's allowed up to 22 weeks, which is more liberal than 45 of 47 European nations. The Europeans think we're too liberal on abortion. Okay? We said, let's put on a ballot to get around the governor. You pass something, at least you can put it on the ballot, as you know, like we did voter ID this year. Let's put on the ballot. The people want to lower it from 22 to 14 weeks. Make Tony Evers and everyone stand up and admit the thing they'll never admit in debate. There's no limit. They don't think 22 weeks is long enough. We've got to reframe this whole debate. And it passed through the House, got stalled, did not go through the Senate. This is the only issue I'm going to complain a little about some fellow conservatives, just ask people to think this through. We got attacked by some other pro-life groups saying, no, it's all or nothing. We can't make any exceptions. You've got to stand for life. I think that's true in a lot of arenas. I mean, my wife was vice president of a crisis pregnancy center, and we were at a university campus. There are people, you need to go out and minister to people, and I want to defend all life. But political reality, that position that I have, that we should save every child unless the mother's life, said nature, is an 8% position right now. By having a lot of groups insist they will only back a politician if they make no exceptions to the life of the mother, We've driven that third away. And the first step is to get it back and say, let's refocus on this issue. Because if you're as old as me, you remember the history. The liberals didn't try to win this issue by saying, we want abortion throughout them. They started a state at a time in New York and all say, let's just allow it in cases of rape and incest. Yeah. That wasn't their end game, but that's what they campaigned on to change the whole debate in the 70s. You know, they knew what they were doing. We need to start at the same place. And so I just say this, there are a few pro-life friends, I know they're raised in the right way, but they'll attack us and say, no, you're compromising. You're right. We're not writing off the first 14 weeks. We're trying to reframe the issue. And the most absurdity, and this is where I've got to watch my emotion because they're friends, but the pro-abortion, no limits on abortion legislators all voted to kill this bill too, as did some of the 100% pro-lifers. And then pro-life group actually scored whether or not you were pro-life or not by if you voted to kill this bill, meaning every pro-abortion legislator who wants abortion until birth got a 17% pro-life rating because they voted to kill a bill lowering it from 22 to 14 weeks. It's insane. I get attacked this day saying, oh, you lobbied for abortion for this bill. It's crazy. We cannot win the debate if we don't reframe it first. And then, of course, you go a step at a time. And you do the ministering and you do everything else you need to do. And listen, I've had a couple women close enough to me that would talk about these issues. One actually was sexually assaulted by an illegal immigrant. It was years ago. It wasn't even recently. She decided to have that baby, and then finally got to, okay, I won't abort, I'll adopt. Okay, baby's born, baby's beautiful, was an energetic person. Those are great. We're not going to run a political election running on make that abortion illegal. That's a ministry spot. That's from the pulpit. That's from one-on-one. Also had one young person years ago, one of the greatest victories of my life. I knew she thought I was a right-winger, but she was at least like debating, I think. She got pregnant as a sophomore in high school and came to me a few days later. I'm thinking, I don't know. Came a few days later and said, well, you know, I don't like any of your right-wing views, but you finally convinced me you're right on abortion. I'm going to have this baby. That's the only issue that mattered. So there are ways to try to save every baby, but we cannot keep having our candidates. Basically, you're defending the 1849 law. Now, the ad on Brad Schimmel was very deceptive, if you saw his whole quote and all. But they took a snippet, made it sound like he was just, beating the drum. But when that issue's out there, it just kills us. We're with 8% of us. And politically, you can only win certain issues. So, sorry I went on that one. That's my little one where I just have to call out, I think, a few of our people and rethink the strategy to win. Number third, I think, is much more unifying. There's no disagreement. Keeping men out of women's sports. And I promised no old story, so I won't talk about my daughter against Riley Gaines because I said I wouldn't, in the race when they were 12. But anyway, but this is an issue that is it's the opposite extreme. It's such a great outreach issue. So not only do we have a couple of bills specifically to keep men out of women's sports, and I will tell you, my son did joke, he was an all-conference runner and all said, one of the top 500 runners in the world, not elite, not Olympic, but one of the top 500. He said, I'd be by far the fastest woman in the world. I'd beat her time by a minute. Just a little perspective there. But this is such an obvious issue. But this is one where we have the outreach. We can be on the offensive. And the example, if you have any moderate friend you think you might win over, the example to give them is prisons. The fact that in California, a guy stuck in prison for life can say, I identify as a woman, therefore I'm going to spend the rest of my life in a women's prison, abusing women. This is an issue where you win over left of center people. This is on the offense. So think of all these issues, the locker rooms on, but there's some great bills on that, luckily, being produced. The fourth issue is pretty straightforward, the enforcing immigration laws. And, right now, let's focus on the criminals. We, again, lead with fentanyl, gangs coming over. I mean, these are the way the border was opened up. I know it's an easy issue to win anyway. People agree with us. They don't want a wide open border like we had for the last few years. But lead with your strong suit. This is about our child dying of fentanyl. Come on, bring it home. It's got to be a top issue. So that's number 4 we want to push. 5th is voter ID. I mean, this is a 70% issue. again, a Supreme Court justice was just elected, and I was almost screaming at the Fox News TV screen because Laura Ingraham said their candidate voted for getting rid of voter ID. That's the understatement of the world. She worked professionally. She was paid professionally to destroy voter ID in the state. So this is a battle, and this one I've got to thank the legislature on. Whatever pros or cons you think, to get that on the ballot, because if we can pass it twice, it's Supreme Court proof. So while they go after the other issues, they cannot rule something unconstitutional that is written as an amendment into the Constitution. So keep that voter ID fight going. The only time I was glad there wasn't voter ID was in 1984 when I forgot to change my registration to vote in Milwaukee, and I got to vote for Ronald Reagan because I could just walk in and tell them what I was. And it was ridiculous. But I saw how bad the law was, and no one else in inner city Milwaukee in that voting place was voting for Reagan. I think I was the only one. So, come on. You need an ID to get into DNC. It's one of our favorite jokes we tell. Can you start letting us walk into your DNC meeting? I'll tell you I'm somebody else, So, anyway, that's it. Number 6 is going to be a tough one. Stopping public unions from hiring lobbyists using your taxpayer money to get more taxpayer money, Title 10. And I would just say, I know we use the title lingo because that was the fight and it was public, but I just like it. This is more, I'd express it this way. We're going to have a hard time keeping this for the Supreme Court. This one looks pretty bleak. But at least reframe it, explain to people. And I think it's important to make sure you use the words public unions and lobbyists. That's what this is about. Plenty of private unions have come to our side. The Teamsters did it. There are a lot of groups, and this is, and some are nervous about that. Some Republicans are like, well, wait, I think they're going too far. You get in arguments over tariffs. But right now, they're coming to our meetings. So I always use the word public unions, I'd say. There may be disagreement on some private unions, which are good, which are bad, but there are a lot of working class people who buy into kind of the Trump agenda. So always use that word public. And lobbyists, that they're taking your money, that someone is taking tax dollars from you to walk the halls of Capitol as a lobbyist for public unions and ask them for more money for public unions. Just express it that way so people understand we're on the right side of this issue, even for someone in the middle. The 7th we really push is the Taxpayer Protection Act. This was a friend of mine, Grover Norquist, runs Americans for Tax Reform, and he formed this a couple decades ago. And basically just a politician signed saying they will not increase taxes. Now, I do want to say there's a caveat in this. You can vote for an increase if you have an offsetting decrease in other taxes. So it's fine to think through strategy. There are places where we're getting rid of a sales tax, but the property tax will be a little higher, but you're going to end up paying less overall, the average taxpayer, or the other. I think here we need a higher sales tax because everyone's coming in from another state to buy things. Whatever. New Hampshire, you're sick of Massachusetts people coming up and buying your stuff and going back. So, so those are all strategy decisions, as long as your net action is lowering taxes, or at least not increasing. That's what the politicians are pledging. So that's very important. It was in our comparison piece last year, of course, between the candidates that the Republicans had signed it, the others hadn't. So this Taxpayer Protection Act, we think is absolutely crucial. So that's number 7. And number 8 is school choice. Now, I was able to testify in front of the Finance Committee yesterday. They had a big public hearing, testify on the importance. This is the only budget item where we ask for money to be in the budget because we're fiscally conservative. And there's a reason for that. School choice money saves money overall. If you put money into a school and a kid's going to a private school that's educating them for half as much as the public school charges to educate them, you come out ahead. I honestly wonder if it's just that these liberals have all been through schools that didn't teach basic math, but it's so easy. We fought for this in New Jersey one year, and it was something like 30-some thousand a kid. This is what public schools are spending already, and they're trying to kill us saying $9,000 to private schools of your tax money. You just saved $21,000. The math isn't hard. I don't remember the exact numbers. That's just going out there. But this is so easy. So it's the only issue we have that asks for more money in a budget. I think that's the one place. Occasionally you just find a cost-effective place. And I felt so blessed. I came to Wisconsin, southerner. You may catch a little bit of the draw. I'm not too south, but came up to Marquette. Was in there. I was there for the first election of 2 people. One for Governor, Tommy Thompson. First article I wrote for the Tribune, Marquette Tribune, was on Tommy Thompson, this upstart who had stories that like put a teacher outside the window. It's not, yeah, there were crazy stories about Tommy. He was a fighter, but he was elected. But Polly Williams was also elected that year. And for any of you who just have followed the history of school choice, Polly Williams was Jesse Jackson's state coordinator for president. I'm sure we agree in 1 in 100 issues, but that issue was school choice. And she started that. She really is the mother of school choice. We can thank a liberal for this because she caught on that the kids I care about in Milwaukee are getting a terrible education. They have to have some options. And I think her and Tommy Thompson formed one of the greatest bipartisan coalitions ever. Sometimes when you hear bipartisan, it's moderate. No, this was not. This was a solution for everyone. And so we're just so passionate on school choice. It's such a great program in the state. I know Governor Evers gave lip service. He did sign off as part of the compromise, but of course we're scared to death that we have to keep this fight up. And it's just such a win-win for everyone. And I want to say, I love my Catholic schools. I mean, I'm a big Catholic. Found St. Mary's in Altoona. I had a Mass this morning. I mean, I'm a big Catholic. Partly because probably even if I didn't believe anything Catholics believe, they put me and my 8 siblings through school for free because we were below the poverty line. So I mean, I love my Catholic schools. I'll be indebted forever. The first time I could write out a 4-digit check, I went to that school and please help some other kid through. So I love them. We love public schools too. My wife ended up teaching at Auburn University, which has the most conservative student body of any public school, not probably Hillsdale and all, but of the public school. Taught there. We moved there because we somehow repeated our parents' crazy plan, and I had 9 children too. So we put them through public school. We did homeschooling some years. We did public school. They had a great public school system, and part of that was because they had great competition for a private school in town. They got up into the top 75 school systems in the country. I think they're 30,000 or 40,000. I mean, they were elite. And it was because they were competing with a good private school. So we went through there and got our free education. So I love public schools too. And keep in mind, 90% are always going to send their kids to public schools, which is why we have to fight on school boards. We have to get the BS out of them. We have to do everything else. We can't just be on an island and say, hey, my children, my grandchildren are private school. I'm not going to worry about them. Most people public schools. So this is about improving public schools too. It's that simple. And if you really need 20 or 30,000, whatever per child, well, great. We just took 2,000 kids off of your roll. Now you've got extra money. Now you don't need as much money, right? So this is all very simple. So in closing, those are 8 issues. If any of you want to jot any answers to these, they're on our website. You can go through and answer. We just want, or you can add other things. Say, hey, I'd really like to do. It's like, obviously we want to stop a lot of woke things, but it's kind of within all of these. So if there's another issue, but these are the things that through our national group, Faith and Freedom, where we can lobby, we want to take to the legislature. We want to fight for them. We want to talk about policy. If there are other issues, or if there are a couple you say, hey, I think you really need to focus on number whatever, give us guidance. This list was formed by doing meetings like this, in 49 different counties and getting feedback. But we want to keep getting feedback, and maybe new issues arise. And we just focused on these. I used to run another organization too when I was here. I just dropped that organization. These issues have become too important. This is my full time. These are the only 8 issues I focus on now. So that's it. And we'd really love to, we're hoping if we get a little funding to have a couple more staffers, or just a couple of us now. During the campaign we had a few dozen canvassing and all. We really do want to make Eau Claire kind of our western center at some point. If we get to a point where we have a field person, I'm telling you that's the first place. I've been here. I just think Eau Claire is the key to so many counties in this region, whether it's when we got our side-by-side comparisons for Trump, when I came through here leading off the Trump bus tour. It's just such a hub. It reaches so much of this area here that, I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We got a bunch of board members all up in Green Bay, but this is really the third spot we want to be. So if you'd like to help with that, we had tremendous volunteer turnout this year. We got literature in our side-by-sides are C3 compliant. They can go into churches. So most of these issues were on the comparison pieces between Trump and Harris and between Schimmel. And they're tax compliant. If you look, there's one posted up over there. I was glad to say, they don't actually say vote for. We have the same rules as a church. And if someone believes there are 48 genders, we want them to know they have a candidate they can support, okay? And if you think there are 2, there's another candidate. So we try to make it crystal clear. Here's what you're voting for. You make it, but that's nice because you can tell a pastor we are C3 compliant, just like a church is. So there's nothing that actually says vote for. You read through your issues and decide. So I am happy to take any questions unless the chairman cuts me off because of time. But any question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, in Eau Claire County, the tax levy is $26 million a year currently, but all liberals that run for office say that the biggest problem we face is levy limits. However, on your tax bill, you were paying, not too long ago, up to 41 million in levy due to the fact that the state revenue department says debt payments can be added to that levy number. Now, we've been very fortunate here to lower our outstanding debt $33 million in the last year. What can the state possibly do to get the revenue department not to allow that type of condition?
It's a very good question. I don't want to pretend I'm an accountant, even though I do like spreadsheets and got them. I would say just at the theory level, because I don't know the particulars, you know, to use an analogy in crime, we used to have the truth in sentencing push, which, no, tell people what the real sentence is for this crime. I think you need kind of a truth in budgeting position too, because as you said, if things are added on as debt, they're often kind of hidden within these budgets. Like they aren't acknowledging that, hey, really, that's money you're going to have to pay. So I think, and I take your advice, I think part of it might be that.
I'm the one that caused the $33 million reduction.
Oh, fantastic.
So,
He's on the county board of supervisors.
Right.
but what they do is perfectly within all of the laws and limits.
Right.
Why the State Department of Revenue allows them to do that, it became, another third of your taxes.
Wow. Well, and we can see, if there's a governor who's open to it in 2 years, you can see the difference Doge has made. Now, was Doge cut anything where he said, oh, wait, I think we actually need it? Sure, of course. If you're going to go in hard, you have to look at it, and I don't know if you go as far as zero-based budgeting or not, but, this assumption that we have to at very least keep spending everything we've been spending, and I think as was very well pointed out in the last year, and keep spending what we were spending during COVID when we put all this emergency money in that never went away. I mean, Ron Johnson hits that beautifully, and I'll steal this from him. He used a great analogy. He said, if you really believed a family member was sick and might die unless they had $150,000 from you and you were rich and gave them $150,000 and they recovered and came back the next year and said, hey, I really like that $150,000. I went through medical bills last year, but I could use that money for other things. I mean, I'm plagiarizing Ron Johnson. I'm not plagiarizing because I'm footnoting. But I would love to talk to you more on that, too, and just get ideas to understand the local budgets. Thank you. Sure. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How much does homeschooling save the state?
So I don't have that figure at my fingertips. I should. School Choice Wisconsin does, and they kind of had their budget people this hearing yesterday, and I was more laying out the philosophy. I don't have a dollar figure, but yes, and expanding it has to save a lot. I mean, you're paying, I think, less than half per kid that chooses, goes on choice, than that doesn't. So the only time you lose a little money, there are some, I don't think of a scenario where you lose money on a homeschool kid. I can't think of one. Maybe someone can tell me. But I think every kid who takes that money instead of taking the full freight that the public schools are charging and built up in their budgets is going to save money. But I'll try to get you a figure back if you don't mind sending me an email. It's on the sheet. I'll get that from School Choice Wisconsin.
The state spends about $14,000 per child right now.
Is that it now? Thank you for that figure.
Oh.
Yes, sir.
So, back after the last census, we redrew the maps. Not the Tony mandated maps from last year, but the original maps, I think it's 2022. They went before the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court kept the congressional maps, but sent the state maps back for some retooling, which they did, and then we're good to go. But since the United States Supreme Court left off on the congressional maps, how can the state Supreme Court come afterwards and say, we need to change these maps? Do you think that would happen?
I think it's about as absurd a decision as some of their abortion decisions, which are just ridiculous. Now, this topic I do know better than local budgets. I'm going to learn from you on local budgets, but this one I do know well. We really got lucky that they overreached in 2020, that Evers overreached. The Supreme Court normally will not take a state gerrymandering case. They were so egregious that they did because they broke the one rule we all know, we always hope they'll break so it can be thrown out. The only thing you cannot do in the U.S. Supreme Court is you cannot take an area losing population and make more districts out of it. We call it the pizza thing. Is you take these districts inner city that would be 90% Democrat and you cut a pizza to shift all the ones outside it. Well, they increased the number of districts in Milwaukee, which was losing population pretty dramatically compared to the rest of the state. They made more districts out of it, and that's what got it to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they threw it out. So that's just the first part of how it happened. They made a terrible legal mistake, thankfully. Now, as you know, this time, I hate to say, I think it's going to be even more dire because, they went as far as I think they thought they could, knowing they still had to win a Supreme Court race, and it was a compromise. It was terrible for us, but there were even worse scenarios, including if we tried to fight it back through the courts for a whole year, I could have seen them not finalizing districts until 3 weeks before the filing deadline and just had our candidates trying to move in 2 weeks to get in a district. I mean, it would have been awful. So I think the Republicans took an awful deal that was the best option they had last year. The problem is now I don't see anything stopping them now with this 4-3 majority having got this election of going back to one of the plans they really wanted. And the assembly is going to be tough next time. It's going to be a war. Conservatives are going to have to do everything right because I'm sure we'll have even tougher districts 2 years from now. As you know, the Senate's just holding on by one. So that's the update. But the state did that decision. They knew the mistake that had been made. So the states, courts here were able to massage things to say they weren't still doing the thing that got it thrown out, and that's how they accomplished what they wanted.
So Robin Moss is the only one that stands between us and Illinois or Minnesota, really.
Well, he really has been. It is funny because I always say the two most unpopular jobs you can get in the United States of America is being a GOP chairman or being a Speaker of the House. So sorry, I hope you knew what you're getting into. It's a war. I mean, he really is a brilliant strategist. I can just tell you around the country, he's thought of the guy who knows how to win races. So, I always get nervous because I get that and like 4 people who start throwing things at me. But, as far as just strategically holding on to majority, it would have been tough to do this year. So he really has. I mean, the reason we have the almost 10-vote margin we have is really just the way he has campaigns that run things. Now, whether or not you disagree with him in particular primaries, is that and the other, I'm just saying. In the end, we have majority today. Yeah, and probably would not if he wasn't here.
So if you're a Democrat operative, you'd really want to take that guy out, wouldn't you?
Yes.
So what's the difference between a Democrat operative and those folks in our own party that say that guy needs to go? I see none. I'm sorry. I like having someone else people want to throw things at instead of me.
But yeah, it is true. I mean, I can just tell you, just hearing reports from friends in Racine, the door knocks there were definitely coming from far left as well as from some people who didn't like Voss on the right when they were trying to do the recalls and all. So it was some of the characters who were out knocking on doors there were left-wingers from Arizona. I should say that, as I think was documented. So, yeah, that was something.
Yeah, the national player.
Any non-Robin Voss related questions? Well, great.
What if that thing goes?
Yeah. I mean, it's brutal. It's one thing that hurts. I think the thing that would have hurt the most on conservatives' election would have been if voter ID went. I think that has been stopped by the Constitutional Amendment. It has to pass one more time. But, this might be the second biggest one because once you basically have mandatory unions membership almost for public employees, that becomes quite a force. So it's difficult. Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
John, thank you.